From my introduction, I'm a researcher, and really everything about research is trying to make an impact in people's lives. It's trying to maybe treat them for a disorder or a disease, or cure them, or improve health care. So I thought a little bit about the examples that, where research has made an impact. And I'm going to tell you, a story that I've been involved in. I'm not the person that makes a difference, but it's how an individual can make a difference to themselves as well as to a larger community. So yesterday was Global Rare Disease Day, and that's why I chose to talk on this topic. So that's the pointer. Okay. So just as a backdrop to what am I talking about? So I'm talking about inherited disease. So what exactly is an inherited disease? So we're all made up of 3.2 billion base pairs or letters, which is the human genome. We know about what 1% of that does right now, so let's not be fooled into the fact that we truly have an understanding of that, because we don't. So boiled down here is the fact that we have 23 chromosomes that contain all of that information. And as individuals, when we have children, one chromosome comes from mom, one chromosome comes from dad. So that makes up the 3.2 billion base pairs of life, and that's the code. Now, that's one. We have 2 chromosomes for everyone then, so that's obviously we have duplications, so we can get by with that. We have 2 of each. Sometimes there's a defect on one of those chromosomes, and that's what this diagram really shows here, is the blue and the white. So if the white is one of those chromosomes may carry a defect, and it may just be in one of those 3.2 billion letters, just a change from one of those letters. But that will change the code that makes up all those other things that you'll hear, your genes and proteins, RNA and DNA and all that. I'm not going to get into the geeky science today. Suffice it to say, one of those changes may mean that a child could inherit one change that means that that gene does not work. So one of the 24,000 nuts and bolts or genes that put us together as human beings may not be working properly. That's okay, because you have 2 copies. Mom may be carrying that, or dad may be carrying that. If mom gives you a good copy, you're okay. We all probably carry maybe anywhere between 10 or 100 defects on one of our chromosomes, and we really don't know that. But we're okay because we've got a good one on the other chromosome. What happens is, and this is the rotten luck of life, is what happens if your partner actually has a defect in the same place. And that's what we call genetic inheritance or rare disease. If both of you are carrying something, here you can see, and this is the white and the blue, where you have one good one, one bad one each of the same thing, then you have a 1 in 4 chance of a child actually having both bad copies. And that's inherited disease. So rare diseases are defined pretty much as this. There was a statute many years ago that someone arbitrarily came up with a number. If you have a disease, there's less than 200,000 people with that disease, we call it rare. That's a lot of people still. Most rare diseases, maybe anywhere between 5 or just a few hundred individuals in the United States have some of these rare diseases. So approximately 250 million worldwide it could be, and these are all estimates. There's no way we could possibly actually attribute every disease or every individual to specific changes right now. But we do know that there's about 6,500 disorders that are considered rare just based on how they present in individuals. Most of them are genetic, and we do know that there are many, many children that have these undefined rare diseases. We do know the basis of some of them, but not all of them. So, just another statistic, if 8% of the world has a rare disease, that's a significant number. Problem being, of course, if you divide that 8% by 6,500 different rare disorders, then they're all very, very different. Oop, wrong way. Okay, so just some statistics. So some of these diseases, I'm going to talk about Batten disease as the example of how that individual, because that individual is that girl there. I'm going to talk about one individual with a rare disease and how they can make a difference to themselves and how they can make a difference to anybody with the same rare disease. And it's simply by participating in a registry, and we'll talk a bit about that in just a minute. So you may have heard of some of these diseases, you may not. There's 6,500 of them. I probably couldn't recite many more than maybe a few hundred of them. You will only know these rare diseases if a family friend or if your family has been exposed to this disease in some way. One of your children or one of your relatives or one of your friends actually has one of these inherited diseases. They're very rare. So these are the types of numbers of some of these diseases that you may or may not have heard of. About 4,200 have been genetically confirmed. I said there's over 6,000. I believe there'll probably be even more than that. In this day and age of what we're calling personalized medicine, I can tell you for a fact that breast cancer is a very common disease. The genetic basis of the breast cancer in every woman is going to turn out to be different. So why would we not call breast cancer a rare disease? Because the individuals, ultimately, it will be less than 200,000 that have that one change that results in that type of breast cancer. Again, I want to emphasize, and these rare diseases, they affect children. Many of them present in children, and many of these children don't live to be the age of 5. So that's the paradox that I'm going to talk about. This individual little girl right now, she's so precious. Of course she's so precious. She's someone's baby. But the paradox here is that, well, she's just one. And she's just one of just maybe a few hundred across, the vast expanses. So, but collectively, we put them all together. We're talking about millions and millions of people. So what are the repercussions of being this little girl who has that rare disease? Well, quite often there's misdiagnosis. I mean, we have tremendous physicians everywhere. In Sioux Falls in particular, we are very blessed with 2 healthcare organizations. But not all doctors are going to see all of these types of individuals. Many children are not going to be diagnosed because a physician can't know everything. He may only just see one of these children in his or her lifetime. And I'll give you an example of that. Because they're so rare, then understanding the epidemiology and really the frequency of these disorders makes it hard to study. And more importantly, if we're going to try and crack these diseases, how can we do research if they're misdiagnosed and there's so few? Research requires large numbers to understand what's going on. So this results in poor health impact. It involves a lot of emotional turmoil. Just imagine if you have a child that you can't, what is it? What's causing the problems in my child? I've known many families that it's taken them years to get a correct diagnosis in these rare diseases, and it's absolutely heartbreaking. Because you want to do something for these children, and you want to understand what you can do for these children. And if you don't know what's wrong with them, it's really hard. So I'm going to talk about Batten disease, and I talked a little bit about this the last time I gave you guys a talk. So Batten disease is one of those rare inherited disorders, and for the sake of time, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a backdrop on it. Batten disease is this: a child will be perfectly normal up until the age of 5. Beautiful young child starts to have visual problems. They will gradually lose their vision over a 2-year period of time, going through prescription of glasses. By about the age of 7 or 8, they will be legally blind. They'll probably learn Braille. By the age of 9 or 10, they'll be struggling with Braille because they're declining cognitively. They'll start stumbling, they'll start having seizures, they'll have more seizures because the current drugs can't treat the seizures. Every child with Batten disease will end up in a vegetative state with a feeding tube and die from being perfectly normal at the age of 5. Because we don't understand what's causing the disease other than there's a change in a particular gene product in that DNA sequence. Nothing manifests. If there's less than 700 children in the United States with this disease right now, it's not something you can screen for. So let's assume that little girl was the one at the beginning there. She has Batten disease. So this is a story of what a gene registry can do. If we take that one little girl and we try and put her together with the other children that have something as devastating as that. Working with others, we put together what we call a clinical rating scale for Batten disease. Think of this right now. I just talked about a 5-year-old who started to lose vision. Most children, they have a test for their eyes in kindergarten to see if they can read, because they're not real good at telling us that they can't see things from the back of the class, right? That's because every child is different. Every child is different. As the father of twins, I can tell you that. So, how do we understand how something where the visual system and then the brain is genuinely falling apart? These children, they undergo a change as they're declining, no different than what a normal child is going through when they have their little tantrums, when they get interested in things and disinterested in things. Their favorite food one day is this and they hate it the next day. Children are so fundamentally different, and they go through so many changes. So how could we attribute the things that are happening in a child losing their vision and then losing their brain function? How can you specifically pinpoint those things? Because many of the things that are happening to them are happening to normal children. I tell the families all the time, don't attribute everything to the disease. They're just children. Remember that. So this is the scenario. A certain laboratory, and that was mine, was convinced it was going to come up with a treatment for Batten disease. The problem is that there were so few children with the disease, and how difficult was it to track the disease in these children? How would we know we would make an impact if we treated this disease? The doctrine of medicine is first, do no harm. But if we're going to treat this disease, we need to correct the disease. We need to understand we're making an impact. Simple as that. So how do we do that? We need to study the children. The goal was to develop a tool where we could pull out the children and take all the cool stuff that they do as children and grow and change and develop and figure out what were those points of the disease. So the challenge is there's a lot of variability. I just told you, you all know children are very different, so we've got to pull that out. That's a challenge. Nobody had ever done this before. The disease progresses differently in the children because it's one change in their DNA. That's not going to change them all identically. There's going to be variation there. So the progression is very different. And there's another 3.2 billion base pairs influencing our whole lives. And they're not the same in every individual. So there's lots of things that we call modifications in our DNA that will influence that as well. So the specific challenges of this is research is, really if we're only taking children with one disease, that's called ascertainment bias. There's going to be a bit of geeky science in this. I'm sorry. Studying something is that there's a bias there. You're studying one particular thing despite all of that variability. Statistical challenges is because if you do science, you need a big N. You need lots of them to study. Well, I've just told you there's not very many of them, and they're all over the place in the United States. And the misdiagnosis is sometimes a child may be told they have Batten disease, or the family may be told, and we would find out that they didn't. So this was the specific challenge. Based on what I've told you, who'd want to do this, right? You're not going to make any money, that's for certain. So I approached, I'm a PhD. I was the lab that said, I'm going to cure these mice of this disease, because we have mice models. That's a completely different talk. I found a pediatric neurologist and said, I'm going to come up with a cure for this disease. I need someone to put together a way to track the children so we can make an impact. And he said, I've only ever seen one child with Batten disease. What do you expect me to do? So this is the story of what the registry is where we actually registered as many children together so we could follow them. So this individual, Dr. John Mink, could put together a rating scale to follow the children. So basically a rating scale is to take all those variables, the children, and examine them on a regular basis so you could track their development. But it's got to be reliable. You've got to have what we call inter-rater reliability and intra. So let's take 3 different physicians. If they examine that child, are they going to come up with the same dotted line because we need to put a numeric value on how this disease is progressing? As well as we have to have intra-rater. Maybe if they didn't have enough coffee this morning, they may evaluate that child differently the next time they see them. Human error, human variability. You have to have something that's reliable to follow this disease. So the Unified Batten Disease Rating Scale was that multi-item scale that basically put together, and there's all sorts of, I could talk for way too long, certainly more than a TEDx talk, on all of the examinations that they would do for this. What it is basically is just taking demographics. You need to know the history, the genetic background, Scandinavian, Western European, Native American, whatever. This disease is more predominantly in European populations. Really get together and understand how many seizures, the types of seizures. There's a whole different scale of, trust me, seizures isn't just one type of thing. There's a whole different nomenclature for the different types of seizures. The behavioral assessment, what they can actually do, they're falling apart. Can they reach out and pick up something? Can they do simple puzzle solving? And then just really get an idea of when the actual disease started, because they were normal until age 5. Nothing was wrong with them until they started losing their vision. And by the time that it's diagnosed, they're probably blind and gone through a lot of these other changes. So this was the first attempt at this, which was I took that physician to a Batten disease meeting. They get to families that have been diagnosed, they get together every year. And I said, you'll become the world's expert if you come to this meeting with me. which he now is when it comes to the clinical progression. He saw 22 children that came to this one meeting. And it was sort of interesting because they put together, him and the other two neurologists put together a rating scale for the first iteration of this in the hotel room. He'd seen one child before, and that was their first iteration of the rating scale because they knew nothing about this disease. So that was the first attempt. Oh, so I went the wrong way. So the next year, we saw the children again, added more children, and more children. So we could get a really good idea of what the progression of the disease is. And then you end up with multiple graphs with lots of variation, but the biostatisticians can tell you that this is the type of progression, and you can pick these points. You can now take a child you've never seen before that's just been diagnosed at age 5, 7, 8, 9, or 10, and try and pick where they are in the progression of the disease. And that's tremendously important because where are we now? If you're going to put a drug in a child, the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, the federal arm for regulations, needs to understand you're not going to do any harm, and that you can actually say what's the outcome of you putting this drug in a child with a disease. So we are doing the first ever clinical trial based on the fact that when we did put one particular drug through lots of geeky experiments we did prior to that said this is what we need to target in this disease. So that one individual participates in a registry. You can't do a rating scale and a clinical tool following children unless you have many of them in there. So when these individuals were approached and said, you know, just sign up for this. We're going to come up with a treatment. You're going to help not just yourself, probably future children. So, you know, what did I say, this was about? And this is what could not have happened without a registry. And then, so this is a video. I don't know how to start this actually because there's no little, here we go. So I came to Sanford about 4.5 years ago. We were going to clinical trial. Clinical trials take some time. So the idea is if we could do this for one disease, what could we do it for others?
There are about 30 million people in the United States affected by nearly 7,000 rare diseases. Connecting all these people is crucial because each person plays a role in bringing us closer to the causes, treatments, and cures of rare diseases. Making those connections is the mission of Sanford Research. We established CORDS, the Coordination of Rare Diseases at Sanford, a national rare disease registry designed to accelerate research into these rare conditions. A rare disease is one that affects fewer than 200,000 people in the United States. Why would you want to enroll? You believe researchers will find cures and improve treatments. You want to assist researchers as they conduct studies. You want to participate in clinical trials and other research opportunities. You want to support your local healthcare providers or rare disease organizations and networks. Enrolling is easy. Visit the CORDS website to tell them you are interested. CORDS will send you the details needed to enroll. And then they will contact you annually to update your information and share opportunities to participate in research. So if you have a rare disease, are a member of an organization that supports people with a rare disease, or if you know someone who is eligible, visit sanfordresearch.org/cords to learn more and enroll. Only then will we be one step closer to putting the pieces together and seeing the whole picture and the crucial part you play.
So that's specifically targeted to individuals with rare diseases, obviously, because the ultimate thing is this: if there's 30 million Americans that have these rare diseases, we're not going to understand all of them unless we get them all in one central location. The diseases may be different, but some of the symptoms are the same, and that will give us the ability to understand. So just as I finish up with 3 seconds left, we should always remember that when it comes to children, it comes to diseases, and we do science, it's observation. Biology is very variable in terms of science, but also with the children, which means things are hard to observe. Thank you.